Wow, it says it right there. Yeah,
It's right there. Hey guys, Professorville, Comic Book University, and I am here with Second Coming creators Mark Russell and Richard Pace. So everybody say hi.
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 Hey,
I actually
Comic Book University, do those credits transfer?
They do
Oh,
100%
okay, good.
transferable. That's what they told me when I went to DeVry also, and it
Yeah,
did not actually work.
that's good. That's good. I hate to think people are being bilked.
I taught at a private college once. They're bilk machines.
Yeah.
Terrible. Oh my God. So your trade paperback released today, and you guys have got to be excited.
Oh, it's yeah. This to me, this is like what I don't really think in terms of individual comics. I think more in terms of books, in terms of longer experiences. So when the trades come out for me, it's always like a special thing because it's like this is like more like people, less like people like looking through the cracks in a fence, and more like them getting to sit in the actual stadium and watch the ball game.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the right out of the bat stuff.
Right.
Actually, a little disappointed that we didn't call it book one.
Yeah, that if we were being highfalutin, which we never are, that would have been the thing to do. But I'm happy with the way everything turned out, and all the extras they let us put in, and the extra pages they let me put into the comic. I think really make this potentially, I think the best collected volume I've ever released of any title.
Really?
Yeah, I believe so, because they really took care of it as a book, as literature, as opposed to just like, here's the first 6 issues, put in some, in a paper cover, go for it.
It's Ahoy is clearly one of the best publishers I've ever worked with. They really, I mean, Tom and Stuart and everyone, Darren, everyone involved really wanted this to be not just another slap a cover on it and there we go.
Right.
It was very much, in fact, now that I know, I'm already thinking about what we're going to do. I'm keeping stuff I threw away from volume 1. So I'm like,
I haven't really had a publishing experience like this since I published God is Disappointed in You and Apocrypha Now with Ahoy, which is very much sort of a boutique sort of, we're really going to make an excellent product whether or not anyone reads it type of experience, which is wonderful for me.
Yeah. The one thing I'm given hope, the one thing I really want to do when we get to the end, whenever that is I want to do a faux Bible edition hardcover of Second Coming with like the gilt edges, and
that's what Ahoy did with God is Disappointed You. They actually made it look like a Bible, which was a brilliant decision, because it's much easier to tell people instantly what it's about and makes them stop and have to look at it more than if it were just in some like cheap paperback.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, I don't want to say numbers because I know we're not firm on the number yet, but that would feel like a real like Bible edition. Like we probably have to do it as a limited edition, at least in the first print, unless it's a runaway hit. But it would be, I would want that. I'd want that big prestige edition. What are they calling omnibus editions?
Yeah, I think at some point I would definitely like an omnibus of some sort. I mean, this is really, really putting the cart ahead of the horse. This is putting the cart ahead of 3 horses, but still, that's a glorious vision.
Yeah.
You would have to release them in different versions, different, not just editions, different versions fully. Like you'd have the Schofield, the King James,
right?
You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, just go full balls to the wall if that's what you're going to do.
Right.
Well, okay. If we get there, we can talk about like different limited editions. Maybe we can even print it as a scroll.
Wow, that's very artisanal.
Yeah, it would be a massive scroll, but you could unroll.
That's like an idea that a Portlander would have. It's like, why don't we just release this as a scroll? Or what's wrong with papyrus?
Yeah, like an Scott McCloud thing where it's like an infinite panel.
Yeah, right.
Unbelievable. By the way, there's a bunch of people wondering about the difference in lighting right now. So Richard and I are in opposite sides of Toronto. Toronto's right in the middle, and we're like moments away from a killer snowstorm with
it's been snowing out here all day.
That's crazy. It hasn't started snowing here yet, but we've already got like several, I guess you got to say, centimeters here. I'm an American implant, in Canada, but I'm from Jersey. We just get shovelfuls of snow. And then freaking Mark out there in Portland, and we all hate you.
Yeah, I'm in
I'm gonna be
sunny
there
but still cold
weeks.
Portland. Please don't confuse this with Los Angeles. It's like 40 degrees out here, but it's beautiful nonetheless. There's sun and it's a nice day.
The West Coast is not all the West Coast.
I wouldn't live in LA.
Yeah, it's like California but colder.
and like Seattle, except not as wet.
Yeah, Seattle, except half as expensive.
That too. Jeez. People in the chat. Hey, I'm from Oregon too. So here's the thing. You guys made it to a trade paperback, which is freaking fantastic. Richard, you told me before that there was a plan to go a lot further in the beginning instead of in the beginning. You know what? I should have started this whole thing off with, "Do not be afraid." How God greets everybody in your guys' book, which is hysterical.
Well,
shouting at them, "Do not be afraid."
But what have you? You guys were planning on doing a lot longer in the beginning, and you wanted to keep it shorter at first, like just do 6 issues to see how it was going to work.
Well, at first I thought, we would be lucky to get through 6 issues just because, we were dealing with sort of a trepidatious publisher. So I thought if they let us get through the middle of our, our tap dance routine, we'll be lucky. But now with Ahoy, it's like they're actually happy with it. So it's like, wow, well, now all these things that I had to squeeze out because of time and space, or all these other stories that I eventually wanted to tell in some format, I can now put in the series. And so we're now talking about going for 2, 3, maybe 4 volumes.
Yeah. When I was first brought on, Molly, our editor at Vertigo, she said there would probably be a second volume. So I was going in knowing that the first 6 issues wouldn't be it.
Yeah, I think that once they actually read it, though, they probably figured, oh, we'll let these guys have their 6 issues, and then we'll politely and discreetly thank them and thank them for their service and send them on their way.
Yeah.
Which is one of the good reasons. I mean, that was the impression I got from them anyways. It's like we begrudgingly have approved you for 6 issues, but you're not getting any more. So it might have been that if it had been a big seller, obviously it probably would have gone for more 6 issues at Vertigo. But with Ahoy, it's just been from the beginning. The idea has been, can we do more of these? How long do you want to go? Which is the way I like to work, without that sort of pressure of having to consolidate a story in the shortest space as possible, being able to sort of let it breathe and spend some time with the characters.
Yeah, that was part of the ship. There's that splash page in issue 2 where I went back at it. I did it in a certain way, thinking about just maybe 1, 2 volumes. In the first 6 issues, we weren't spending that much time in heaven. Yeah. So I thought, okay, just let's get an impression across and let's keep going. Now knowing that we're going for another 2, 3 volumes, I was like, okay, heaven's got to be a lot more impressive. So I went back and I completely redid that page. And it went hand in hand with redoing when we got permission to do the dead fast food court restaurants.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. When you're telling a longer form story, the world building is much more important. You got to sort of really build a foundation for everything that's going to come later.
Yeah. And that's I'm really looking forward to some. I'm not going to give any spoilers here. Mark can do it. I'm not going to. But there's some design stuff coming up, and I got to tell you, it's Leonard, issue 7. I think we can talk about issue 7.
Oh yeah,
Leonard is done finishes for the full issue 7.
Yeah, one of the things that one of the good things about doing more series is that allows us to spend an entire issue sometimes with one character, or even just like a part of that character's life. So it allows us to tell us a more, full story. So issue 7 is entirely about Sunstar as a baby and his parents, the last night on his home planet's, existence, and his parents are it's basically sort of like the story of Superman and Krypton, but it's the last night of the existence of their planet, and the his dad, who is a scientist, is the only one who knows, much like Jor-El, but not entirely. Is the only one who knows that this is the last night of the planet's existence. And unbeknownst to him, his wife has scheduled this real estate guy who wants to sell them a timeshare to come over for dinner on the last night of their existence. So he spent the whole last night of his life basically dealing with this timeshare guy. But the fact that we have, like, we know we have 2 or 3 more, 4 more volumes means that every issue doesn't need to be a car chase. You can have issues where you spend talking about these individual stories, which is great. I think it's going to make the series a lot better because of it.
The thing I love most about that issue, and since you gave the outline, you spoiled it a bit. I really feel the second volume, based on what I've read so far, Mark can probably correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like it's going to be much more about Sunstar. Everything that Mark's told me about it is we're going to be dealing with.
You are wrong.
I am wrong?
No, it will be. I mean, I think it will focus more on the Sunstar and Christ both.
Yeah.
But them, as opposed to their lives and who they are and their backstory, as opposed to the sort of like plot-driven sort of chase to avert the world from dying, because you can only do that so often in comics, saving the world. And to me, it's always one of the things where it's like, I just, this feels like almost like a trope in superhero comics where they're constantly trying to save the world. So
I'll plot less.
The fact that we're able to do multiple volumes allows us to like focus more on the characters and their private worlds, their worlds exploding, their worlds, them saving their own sort of like personal worlds.
Well, in the sense that even with Superman, who's been around for 75 years, Jor-El only serves as an excuse to give us Superman in almost all the stories. There's like one Alan Moore story where he touched on Krypton. You get a sense of like what his father was actually going through when he was like a decrepit old senile scientist. In Mark's story, and the thing I loved about it is the parents actually are characters having an emotional life in this issue. And I mean, even with the horrible last Superman movie we got, they only exist to create the drama that we have with Superman later.
Yeah, it's something you have to keep in mind when you're writing and I guess drawing an issue, is that every character, no matter how minor, has their own life. They have their own reason for being, and it's not to revolve around the main characters.
Yeah, and I think issue 7 is going to. I haven't sent them in because I'm not happy with them yet. I got about 12 different cover ideas for 7, and it's because the story's so rich. And when you're playing with the trope of like destruction of Krypton, there's a lot of gimmies that I'm just not going to bother sending in to you guys to look at.
Right.
But the family dynamic is so key, and how it's going. It's like I got about 4 or 5 ideas that I think I'm going to tighten up and send in probably after C2E2 once I think about them a bit more. I think everything all the time. I do layouts and I'll sit on them for like a week and then I'll look at them again.
I do that with writing, except it's usually more like a month. Like I'll sit on the writing for a month and I'll go back and try to read it as a reader and figure out what I did wrong.
Well,
and fix things.
Second Coming slowed me down a lot. I mean, it's like I'll get a comic book and it's all plot. You're just delivering the action, or you're setting up the talking head so they can talk about the action that we're going to get later. The Second Coming's entirely been about ideas. So how I frame the talking heads, I actually have to rethink all the time and saying it's not just who's on the left, who's on the right, who gets the balloon first. It's like I'm putting the camera here.
Right.
Am I relating to these characters in a way that allows that dialogue to come across to the reader in the best possible way?
Sure.
And it's a wonderful challenge. I think I'm getting better at it because I don't think, especially with the humor aspect, I really have to think, okay, for example, one of the things I do more is like I'll slip in an extra panel because it's an excellent joke. But
I totally trust you to do that too. It's like whatever pacing or sort of additional panels or spacing you need to do.
Yeah.
I trust you to do it because I know that it's going to work visually better in the end. I think this is how I like to work as a writer.
Yeah.
Is like leaving the artist in charge of the visual like I'll make basically my panels are like recommendations, but it really is the artist to figure out. It's up to the artist to figure out what this actually needs visually to be told.
Yeah, yeah, and I got that early on. I mean, the experience of working on Second Coming went from I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing here. Are we allowed to start here?
What's that?
Yeah, whatever. I know you, so
it was basically.
I expected it.
I've done so many horror and fantasy comics, and I consider superheroes fantasy. That it was entirely about setting up beats for whatever.
Right.
And because I also write, getting Mark's stuff and realizing it's like, okay, if I'm doing this, if I was shooting this as a movie, I would actually do a camera change right in the middle of this dialogue bit. And so instead of like just adding panels willy-nilly, oh, I want to draw something cool, it's like, no, I'm going to add a panel because I really feel this line needs to be. And it's wonderful to be working with scripts like that. I mean, so many times it's like, well, you know, I want to draw a cool tank. I'm gonna cram everything into the one page. I can do a splash page of the tank. No, it's like, you know what? He gave me a splash page. The emotional beat needs something else other than a splash page. So I'm going to draw the interpersonal drama across this, reduce the splash page a bit because it makes the story read better. And that's such a great experience. That is.
One thing I've discovered as a writer is that splash pages are greatly overrated. I mean, they're useful sometimes, but more often than not, what really sort of contributes to the emotional accessibility of the piece are just reaction shots, not splash pages, but just giving a chance for the characters to sort of react what has just happened or what has been said is more important than, like, you know, a giant 2-page spread or a splash page with, you know, showing somebody being punched.
Yeah, I look at it from the Walt Simonson point of view, where it's like, if you're going to do a splash page, it better be wow.
Right.
I find that the vast majority of comic books, they don't. They assume that the splash page just by its existence is wow.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's become like sort of a trope of comics, is that, you know, on page 4 and then on page 21, you have to have splash pages to tell the reader that this is an important story. Yeah. Whereas I feel like what makes the story important is their own personal emotional resonance to what's happening and what's being said and what the characters are going through. And that doesn't necessarily require a splash page. What it requires is a moment of reflection, usually.
Well, it's when I used to teach comics, I had all these kids who were coming in. This is 2000, so everyone still has image in their head about the idea of doing like really big imagery all the time, like the Rob Liefeld nonsense. And I had to keep reminding them, it's like one of the biggest moments in Frank Miller's entire run of Daredevil was when, sorry, talking about comics there, like superheroes, but when Bullseye killed Elektra, and that was like a quarter vertical of the page.
Right.
That was one of the most important moments in the entire narrative run of the character. And then the follow through when she goes to die in Matt's arm, tons of little panels to really drive across how much of a struggle it was for the character, and then the emotional reaction with Matt at the end of it. And that's storytelling, and that's what we're doing. We're telling stories. If you're doing the big Rob Liefeld splash page every other page, what you're doing is you're selling a widget.
Right. I think in the end, the size of the panel, and even if it's a splash page or if it's broken up, needs to sort of like reflect the emotional resonance of the experience of the reader, not necessarily your attempt to dazzle them, but what your sort of appreciation of what they're going through emotionally, if they're reading your story correctly, if they're following along, you know, giving them time and space to absorb the moments that you're giving them.
Yeah, because I mean, having control of the color for the pages I'm drawing, I can bring in the special effects for the color aspect of it. I mean, I don't need a full splash page for the Ark of the Covenant destroying a city, because I know I can lay out the page and then hit the lighting so it's like ooh, and then still have emotional resonance within the page. I don't think I needed bigger panels than I did for showing the flood. And it worked better, it being its size within the context of telling the story. So
Right.
I'm fully 100% with Mark here on like, I think splash pages, they're good when you use them well, but I think people thinking you need them are a little too like Michael Bay needing another explosion. He's already got 1,000 in every movie.
Right. Everything that exists in any sort of medium of storytelling needs to be there intentionally. There needs to be a reason you did it, other than just like, well, this is the way it's done.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's the biggest lesson from Watchmen. As a young reader reading Watchmen, and using the 9-panel grid, so suddenly 2 panels put together in a 9-panel grid. Well, that's kind of large now, but it's situational. It's in context. It's large. 3 panels across is large. At the end of Watchmen, when they do all the splash pages, it's like, oh my God, what's happening? And it's that big. Right. Basically, storytelling with intent is the best tool of any creator, I think.
Well, I dig it. I like the idea of the panel layout being more important than the actual just splash. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, so Richard, I was actually asked about how Mark, how you do your writing and whatnot. I decided instead, let me switch the question around. Richard, when you get the art direction from Mark, what he wants to see in a panel, how do you relate to it, and how is his different than maybe somebody else's?
Well, I think we've already kind of covered part of that, where it's like a lot of the other scripts I get are basically just describing the intent of the action and the dialogue, and everything's targeted towards an end goal at the last page. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I'm reading Mark's scripts, there's a wonderful unfinished quality in terms of like directing the visuals.
So he does leave a lot for you to decipher for yourself.
I think so. I believe so, in terms of my experience, in the sense that it's how to bet. Good question, because I haven't been asked it before. Mark tells the story, and a lot of the story is told in the interpersonal communication between the characters. Like, he'll describe the action, but it's very much it's like in the issue where Sunstar and Jesus are just walking down the street talking. The storytelling, occasionally you say, well, there's a story in the sign in the background with a funny name. Put that in there. And that's fine. I can do that. But for me, what's more important in terms of telling the story is, okay, how are these people talking? How are they relating? And how can they use the camera to really get across what they're communicating to each other? And because there's a character subtext in how they talk and how they listen when they are listening, if they're listening, it allows me to do a lot more focus on character expression, character gesture than I would otherwise have. Basically, in a standard superhero comic book, someone says something, the other guy gets excitable and shouts something back, and then they punch. I mean, that's not happening in Second Coming. They have long conversations, and you realize, oh shit, this person's sad too, but they're not saying how sad they are. So I got to kind of get across where that sadness is in the dynamic how they're talking, so the reader gets it without my hitting them over the head with it.
So
that makes sense?
It does, 100%. Plus, you also answered another question I was going to ask: who determines what is said in the background? So it was Mark's idea to do like angel wings on that KFC bucket that God was eating.
No, I think that was Richard's idea.
Pretty much, if it's got a penis or it's a really asinine, weird joke that comes in from left field, it's me. Mark comes up with the smart stuff. I do all the.
Yeah, generally speaking, if it's an image, it's Richard. If it's word related, it's probably me.
I think the only word related joke that came in was the sign going into the food court.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was yours. Yeah.
Because it wasn't as funny as Mark, but it was in my head and I couldn't let it go, so I had to put it in. So
that's great. Okay, so Mark, you have had so many. Look, I follow you guys, but we're all old friends on Facebook for like a couple of months now. Anyway, follow you guys on Twitter. Richard follows me back. I guess Mark is a little bit of a snob. Putting you on the spot, bud. But
geez, yeah.
Wow.
Called out.
All right, well, screw that. I'm blocking you now, Bill.
Oh, geez. What do you call it? No, realistically though, what have you? you've got so many quotes in here, and I could see that you care about, I don't know, the world in general. I could see your politics. I could see your ideals. Not very different.
That's like a great sort of like mission statement of liberal apathy. So I care about the world in general.
No. I consider myself a progressive. What do you call it? So no,
I do too. I consider myself progressive.
Yeah.
But I think there is this sort of like temptation to feel like, oh, I care about the world in general, therefore I'm justified in, not caring about you as a person.
That often happens in psychology, where every so often you'll have somebody who will do a good deed and then figures he's kind of owed.
Yeah, he's
So
bought
he
his
can
way
be
into
a jerk
heaven.
to someone
He's
else.
bought his way into heaven with his political beliefs, and now he doesn't actually have to be a decent person.
Well, that actually goes and see, I was going to bring up like some of these ideas that you've had, some of these conversations that you've had. Case in point, the greatest temptation isn't to do evil, Jesus says in your book, but the need to be seen doing good.
Right.
Like where are you getting some of these ideas from? Like, are they just literally popping, or?
Well, a lot of them, they don't really pop so much as they thud. They are more like products of my own sort of self-criticism and my own sort of like struggles with my own faith and my own sort of like feeling like a fraud as a Christian when I was younger and later in my life as an artist. And so a lot of it comes from my own sort of introspection, like me just sort of like realizing, trying to be more authentic, trying to feel like that I'm doing that I am what I aspire to be, that I am practicing what I'm preaching, which doesn't always happen, but it's something I at the very least think about and try to be honest about when I'm falling short of the mark.
Imposter syndrome is something
By the way, if I had a
know.
memoir or an autobiography, that's probably what I'd call it: falling short of the mark.
You gonna write that down really quick, or just use the video as a note?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll just forget about it.
It's a good one. Mine, I'm still a dick.
I've still got the image of you trying to push me into Leonard that one day at Gotham Central Comics and Collectibles. So I'm keeping that on record. You are kind of a dick, but I love you nonetheless.
Oh, well, thank you. Everyone loves Dick.
You're a big bully. Speaking of which, seriously, the idea of like in the beginning, literally the beginning of the first issue, the Adam and Eve characters finding the tree of life and death and good and evil. There were a lot of suggestive images on there. Who came up with that idea?
That was Richard.
That was seriously Richard. Why am I not surprised?
Actually, Mark sparked it. I don't know if it was intentional, but he wrote trees.
I wrote trees. It was fruit. The rest was all Richard.
Yeah,
we tried to dial him back a little bit, and he was like, "No way."
And I was thinking, well, if there's two trees, and then next page they're like both eating from the fruit. I said, well, two trees. You got a man and a woman, male and female tree, because we actually have male and female trees. And I figured, okay, I'm gonna give them sexual. Like if you take a really good look at it, you realize the trees are actually physically gendered too, not just the fruit. And
that's a really close look, because I have no idea what a female tree looks like.
They it's harder to tell.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You have to completely uproot a male and go, oh, look at those roots.
There's like the pistil and the stamen. I don't know where this other stuff is coming from, but hey.
I'm teaching people about religion, and Richard's teaching about botany.
Right.
Apparently.
But you do clearly have some kind of religious upbringing. Like I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Clearly.
And so I want to get into the controversy of the book later if we have time, because I wonder if that's just something that's been brought up so many times it's been beat to redundancy. But in general,
it has, but that's okay. It's whatever you're interested in, that's what we'll talk about. Yeah. Because there's the reason why it's been brought up so many times, I think, is because it's how most people came to hear about the book. And therefore it's probably the subject of greatest interest to your listeners.
Possibly. I hope so. In general, for anybody who's not overly familiar with this book, who's listening now or later, great candy, by the way. I think that the gist of the book is, in general, and Richard might jump down my throat for this, but what if Jesus met Superman, but in a completely different world? It's not actually Superman, and and they hung out with each other. So
yeah, it's basically Jesus Christ as the world's putative savior, sharing an apartment with superhero, our sort of modern religious equivalent.
Yes.
In a larger sense, it's about the cult of power versus the cult of faith.
And there are some really great moments in here. So there is obviously some controversy to it. You said at one point, like at the very end of the first issue, Mark, you had a one-page blurb about, you know, what you felt about the book, and you said that a lot of people have called it blasphemy, and you accepted the word, and you looked as blasphemy as being, how did you describe it best? Do you remember?
Anyone with something new to say.
Yes.
Basically, it's like blasphemy is just not conforming to the orthodoxy of what the leaders of the religious institutions have agreed is the correct interpretation. So yeah, I wholly embrace the title of blasphemous. It would be there'd be no point in writing if it weren't blasphemous in that sense, because what's the point of writing something that everyone already agrees with? It's only in saying something new and covering a bit of cognitive territory that nobody's covered yet that writing and culture has meaning.
So almost the difference between blasphemy and heresy.
Right. And heresy is a little different. That heresy is like you are saying a doctrine that's been sort of like already dismissed, which I guess you could say this is blasphemy is sort of a new heresy. Heresy is something that we've already thought about, and it's like, no, that's not it. Whereas blasphemy is like, well, there's one I haven't heard before.
Blasphemy is heresy that hasn't been codified.
Yeah. But I'm happy with either title. Blasphemer or heretic. I'll respond to them both.
I really need you to make up your mind soon. Are you getting business cards made? And I really want to know, is it Richard Pace blasphemer? I mean,
the business cards, man, they're expensive. Yeah. You can't keep on rewriting them. Just the line doesn't work.
We're in comics. We got no money.
But the funny thing is I feel like you've done so much. Both of you have done so much to kind of dispel the blasphemic sort of ideas of it.
Well,
like,
I think there's this sort of like hidden message in the idea behind terms like blasphemy and heresy, which is like, this subject is so important that we better not think about it. You know, it's like, to me, that just seems like inherently stupidly ironic. It's like, well, if it's that important, if it's that central to our lives, shouldn't we be thinking, you know, maybe more about it? Shouldn't we have more challenges to the orthodoxy rather than less, if it's that important?
We're still getting, like, early today on Twitter, I saw someone post in response to Ahoy PRing the release of the collection. And someone again said, "Oh, it's just another book making fun of Jesus." And I'm like, you know, it's been a year, and we've been telling people for a year, Jesus is the only character that really isn't ridiculed here.
Literally.
And
for me, it's like, I feel like the people who are making fun of Jesus are like the prosperity doctrine, you know, the mega churches, who are completely just using him as like a mascot for their religion while ignoring his teachings. To me, that is what they meant when they said, "Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain." Not that you won't say "God damn it," which doesn't hurt anybody. That you would take the image, the brand of Jesus Christ, and use it to do your, sell your coffee, or sell your ideology in a mega church to people who don't know any better.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes right down to it, a lot of the traditional using the name in vain, like "God damn it," is aspirational. I mean, if you really believe and you say "God damn it," you're hoping God's going to come in and go, "Hey, I'm going to."
Yeah. Well, frankly, God should be damning some things.
Yeah.
Yeah, undeniable. But like I was saying, you've gone out of your way, both of you, to really kind of dispel that. At one point, there's a joke in here, and I'm wondering if I'm just reading too much into this. Sunstar is walking with Jesus, and he says, "So, have you ever had a girlfriend?" And Jesus says, "Well, actually," and then all of a sudden God walks in, "Hey," and then the whole thing is, spelled. Were you about to bring up Mary Magdalene, but decided against it?
Yeah, it was more just sort of like giving a nod to that whole sort of speculative line of like Christian reasoning that was mostly brought up like by the Gnostics and the post-Gnostics about whether or not Jesus lived the life of a normal human being. And there are some like Gnostic non-canonical books that say that it was somebody else who actually died on the cross, and that Jesus went on to have a normal life after that and fathered children by Mary Magdalene. I mean, again, this is all sort of like fan fiction. No, none of it really happened or didn't happen. It's just sort of like people's different thought experiments to make sense of Christ's teachings to themselves. But it was just sort of a nod to that.
Mm.
Well, there's that whole gulf. I mean, it's like we know him as a kid. Then he shows up fully formed as
yeah.
And it's like, what happened?
I will say that according to the traditions of the first century Jewish society and Judea in the first century AD, it's almost inconceivable that he would have gotten to the age 30 and not been married and had kids.
Yeah.
I mean, most people were married by the age of 13 or 14 in that society. So.
Yeah. I actually, so this goes back to my whole Catholicism and encountering that and first hearing the idea that, what did he do for that time? And I got in trouble for coming up with the idea, well, what if he went away, he had a life, and his wife died in childbirth, and that's when he had his awakening. And it was just purely speculative for like a teenager, because, teenagers say dangerous things. And how upset my family got at my floating that idea,
right? Which is entirely reasonable.
Religion I was growing up in,
entirely, entirely plausible sort of like explanation for that gap in like 18 years between when we leave Jesus in the Gospels at the age of 12 and then see him again at the age of 30. Is that, well, he was working and he had a family and he had a life, and then something happened to it all. And that's when he found, his calling. And in fact, that's what happens to, I think, most of us, is that we find ourselves in the deepest recesses of our vulnerability.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of a Jesuit I knew as a kid. I actually ended up meeting a lot of Jesuits when I was young.
I generally like the Jesuits. I think if I had to join like a sect of Christians, I would probably choose the Jesuits.
Yeah.
But like the teaching class.
First one I talked to, he said is everything all right with my mic? So getting some weird feedback.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's the. Does somebody have the video on?
Mm-mm.
That's weird.
Testing.
Well, it's over now.
Do I sound okay?
You sound okay.
Well, that's all that matters.
Richard and I have the snow, but Richard has more snow, so I'm throwing blame that way.
So the Jesuit had his personal theory that Jesus was such a precocious and brilliant child that he went away to be schooled, and he studied in the East. So he studied with the Greeks and the Egyptians, and then he came back as a man. And that was his justification for that long time away.
Interesting.
18 years away at school. Why would he come back?
Yeah, geez, why would you come back to that shithole?
Yeah.
Like Nazareth.
I mean, it's like, go to Greece and it's like, look at all these learned people. Go to Egypt. Look at all these learned people. Look at this library.
I read a book once about the life in the first century, and it suggested that the town of Nazareth in Christ's time would have been like no buildings over 1 story tall, no signs or anything that had any writing on it, because most people would have been illiterate. Probably no more than like 200 or 300 people. It's like it's like living, in a it's like visiting my cousins once in Idaho, and they lived in a town like that.
Yeah,
I can't, unimaginably boring. I don't know why you would go back to a place like that.
And if you're a carpenter, not much of a career for a carpenter when there's only like.
No. Well, and in fact, the word that they used in Aramaic for carpenter was really just the word for craftsman, because there weren't a lot of trees in that area. So chances are you most likely worked with stone or brick.
Yeah.
And you handle that. I'm curious, what was the character of Simon Shimon supposed to represent for you in that first book? Because we saw that he was, the brother of Christ, one of the brothers of Christ, who may or may not have been an actual brother of Christ. But Definitely somebody close to him. And in fact, you showed that he wasn't. You actually showed that he wasn't the actual brother.
He's not his physical brother, but he treated him like a brother.
Exactly.
He was like his best friend who didn't, his mother was a prostitute, so he didn't really have much of a home life. So he brought him into his home and allowed him to like live as his brother, which turned out to be a curse in the end because he took over the carpentry shop after Jesus left, and was branded as a traitor because he was supplying like crosses and other accoutrements to the Romans. But to me, it represented sort of the path not chosen. Like in a lot of ways, that's our choice. Is like a lot of times we either drop out and become revolutionaries or we become collaborators. And there's really, for depending upon where we are in our lives, there's not a lot of other choices. I feel like in a lot of ways, that's the choice I made. My choice was either to like drop out and start working and writing about the things I really cared about, or to be a collaborator with the people that I thought were destroying the world. And so, I made my choice, but somebody then took up the job that I left and became the collaborator.
Wow.
The way I cursed them.
The less empathy you have, it seems the more money you're able to make, right?
Yeah, it seems like it. It seems like that's useful to not have very much empathy if that's your goal.
Or exploiting people.
but at the same time, I think that really it's about finding the meaning that your life has to you, and the meaning that Christ's life has to him was to tell people not to wait around for God, because God wasn't coming back, and they should begin doing for each other what they had always sort of expected God to do for them. And for Shimon, that meaning was being part of something bigger than himself, being part of a family. And it just worked out better for Jesus than it did for Shimon in a way. I guess it didn't work out terribly well for either one of them in a purely physical mortal plane. But yeah, it's about how, sometimes it's more important to choose the life that has meaning for you than the one that will come with the most rewards.
So that being the Robert Frost moment, as you basically described it, you think that Shimon should have walked with Jesus instead of stayed back and managed the shop?
I don't know that Shimon had much other choice than to do what he did. He chose what he was good at and what Christ had presented him as a gift. But sometimes it's like that. When you choose your fate, when you choose your calling, you have to write it out for better or for worse, and it may not take you where you wished it would.
Well, I didn't really feel that Shimon had much agency right from the start. I mean, such his home life situation, he got to escape to Jesus's family.
Yeah,
taken in by that, and I get the feeling that the type of damage from absentee parenting, left in a situation where it's like, oh, I have the option of taking over Jesus's business. Well, I guess I'm maintaining the family, right. But he ended up being so alone. And he didn't have essentially the strength of character to, when the Romans said, "You're doing this shit for us."
Yeah, it's sort of about how no happy ending is really guaranteed, and you can, we all sort of like are at the whims. Even Christ himself are at the whims of an apathetic and sometimes downright antagonistic universe.
Well,
it's almost Lovecraftian. It's a larger, uncaring universe.
Oh wow, that's a really good comparison. That's a really good comparison. I love the idea that you guys made it so that Jesus didn't know what was going on ever since, the crucifixion, and he didn't come right back. He didn't come back like you promised he would, and he had no idea what was going on. So you could basically have a brand new, Christ to the world universe in your comic book, because God forbade him from even looking down that well at what was going on.
It was sort of a plot device at the time. It was sort of how to explain like how he could come back and not really have an idea about like what had gone on with his religion, like not knowing about how badly people had sort of misinterpreted him. And the intervening 2,000 years between the time he left and came back, it was because God wouldn't even let him look down the hole. So it was more born of that, but also I think in a way worked on a plot level by sort of underscoring how upset God was that people crucified his son in the first place.
Yeah.
He even said at the one point, you guys had him say, how does that make me look?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was disappointing, but no, I get it. Wow. In my experience, Jesus says to Sunstar after mistakenly beating up this one guy, wrecking his home, destroying his totally awesome Dances with Wolves statue. That's what I interpreted it as, because he thought that this guy was stalking his wife. He says, in my experience, force usually fails. Mercy often fails too, but does so more pleasantly. This is so golden rule. So and golden rule fires across the all of the religious spectrum. Any religion you have has a golden rule. It just felt so Buddhist to me. It was great.
Thanks. Yeah, a lot of the things that Christ said in his teachings are not only things that are like, oh, these are, platitudes that sound nice but don't really apply to the real world. A lot of them actually are good advice. Like a lot of them are like, no, this is actually what will make life better for you if you don't live consumed by pettiness. Or, if you have to choose between being a sucker or being an asshole, you should probably choose to be the sucker, because then it's on the other person. And you can, it's much easier to live down being a sucker than an asshole.
I'm not going to lie. I get, I'm an Italian from Jersey. I get pissed a lot. But honestly, rereading that today, yeah, I'm just like, okay, maybe I should really calm down. So you at least reach somebody. I'm just saying.
I think if you treat people with generosity of spirit and they betray that generosity, it's like you can choose to sort of brush it off. If you're strong enough a character, you can just sort of brush it off and move on. But if you don't, if you're like petty with people and constantly bickering and angry, you kind of locked yourself in a prison from which you can't really escape, no matter how strong your character is.
The older I get, the older my circle of friends gets. I got a lot of friends who are in their 60s and 70s. And the big lesson I get from their experience as they near the end of their sunset years is there are people out there who are always worried about what they get. Right? Am I getting enough respect? Am I getting enough power? Am I getting
if they don't really care about the outcome? It's the idea that I've got to come out ahead.
Yeah. No one likes
some sort of trap.
At the end of it all, no one likes those people.
Yeah.
And the people who are generous with their time, like I try and be generous with my time. I try and be generous with my empathy. I don't always succeed, but I try. And I find that it pays off better, where it's you get the people, especially people online, who are just nothing but angry and hateful, and everything hurts them. How can they enjoy their day unless online trying to hurt people?
Someone once said something very wise. I'm not going to claim credit for this because I didn't make it up, but someone once said that hate is a punishment we inflict on ourselves for the crimes of others. So that's kind of, I think, like in a good way, summarizes like Christ's approach towards forgiveness. Yeah. It's like, why would you invite this sort of punishment on yourself when you did nothing wrong? Isn't it better to forgive and then be free of their crime than to hate and be forever locked in this sort of internal duel that doesn't even get revenge, because of this thing this other person did to you? I'm not saying that you can always choose to forgive. Sometimes, hate is warranted. Or sometimes, I can't speak for any person of, oh, you should totally forgive them for that thing they did to you. But if it's within you to forgive or to somehow release yourself from the crime of the other person, then by all means do so. You're the one who's got to die when it's your time to die. So, your life should be lived for your benefit in the meantime.
It's when I was really young, I heard the Aboriginal story about the two wolves that live inside us. Yeah, you both heard that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm part Cherokee. It's part of my, it's handed down. But by all means, that
we have Blackfoot in us. Well, I'm not going to Elizabeth Warren it.
Thank you.
But
no, but by all means, maybe somebody didn't hear the story. So.
Oh, okay. So there's an Aboriginal elder's talking to his grandson, and elder says, "In every person, there's two wolves. Okay, an angry wolf and a happy wolf. Okay, and they're both trying to run your life." And the child says, "Well, how do I get to choose who runs my life?" It says, "Which one do you feed?" And ever since I was young, I went, well, you know what? I have a choice. Do I feed the angry wolf or do I feed the loving wolf? And life's better when you're feeding the loving wolf, because whenever I've been angry, there's been no upside. Maybe I've lashed out. Maybe I got an emotional release from it. But at the end of it, I still have to recover from what I went through. Whereas if someone else tries to get me angry or tries to hurt me and I just let it go, well, they spent all the energy under Angry Wolf and I'm fine. So it's yeah.
Okay, so honestly, this is one of my absolute favorite. I don't like to play favorites, but I'm just going to say in general, I haven't interviewed any other indie guys, but this is one of my favorite indie comic books that have come out.
Well, thank you.
I love this story. I really do hope this goes past a second volume because it's fantastic. I do have to make one point of contention. I don't think we got enough of Rowboat.
Yeah, I'll try to work some robot in for you later on, just for you.
I'd appreciate it.
I really think we should have a meeting in Toronto and talk about doing a robot one shot, maybe with
just a whole spinoff. You give him like his own 12-issue series.
12 issues?
Yeah,
well,
right.
You partnered up with
rowing for glory, man.
These ideas just pop out of you guys. It's insane.
Dude,
But no, in reality, you've already got an entire cast of character in that like faux Justice League where, you could, and they've got their own personalities, and I love it.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge of the second season is like, who do you focus on? Who do you allow their story to be told? There's already so many already existing characters. It's like, when are they going to play a serious role in the story?
Richard, you're going to be at C2E2. What table are you going to be at?
Oh God, you asked me to remember this. I got it on my Twitter account. Hang on. I'm at table 09 or 09.
09. There's going to be like an artist gallery. That's where you're going to be at.
It's in Artist Alley.
Okay.
I'm sitting with a whole bunch of other artists represented by the same art rep we have, Cadence Comic Art.
Okay.
And I'm going to have a pile of Second Coming trades available, along with other, standard con things, sketchbooks, artwork, and stuff like that.
Nice.
So, yeah.
And you guys are both going to be in Toronto? Toronto Comic Con?
Yeah.
Finally, so I can get my my Second Coming books all signed by Mark also. I already got you and Leonard, so we're good. Also, maybe a couple of these, which I'm just saying that's not what this chat is about, but oh my God, Wonder Twins, man.
Yep. I'll sign those too.
You are a genius. I got all 12. I don't want to break your hand. But honestly,
totally fine.
You make me. I saw one of the tweets that you did recently, where you said you were talking with somebody about Snagglepuss and Flintstones, how you were allowed to that's what it was. You guys were talking about, Dan. Is it Didio or Didio?
Didio.
It's Didio. Okay.
Actually, technically, Didio.
It's
Didio. Okay.
Didio.
Okay, so I will correct myself.
we know how to say an Italian name.
There we go. That course correction. So you were talking about Didio, and you said he allowed me to do what I wanted to do with Snagglepuss and do what I want to do with Flintstones, which sounds like a completely different direction. Now I feel like I've got to read those also, which
I would recommend it if, not only just because I wrote them.
All right. Yeah, I'm probably going to check those guys out. So honestly, thank you guys both so much for showing up, guys, and we're out of here. Class dismissed.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.